This is the Aftermarket Radio Network.
Welcome everyone to yet another episode of Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z. I'm Matt Fanslow, and get in your mouse and get out of here. That and more after a word from our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training. Check out our NAPA Autotech Facebook page to find out the latest NAPA Autotech virtual class scheduled at a time that is convenient for you. Learn from the comfort of your home. All right, I got quite a few, I think, really good emails with good questions that I think are fit to discuss. So I just looked at them and felt like there's enough here for an episode and maybe worthwhile, especially with questions about more technical stuff, trying to see a need, fill a need. So the first question is, I'm looking to buy a new multimeter. What do you suggest? I got to tell you, my knee-jerk reaction at first was don't, but that's not exactly true. I don't know that I would purchase a dedicated DMM or digital multimeter. I don't really use just a straight up meter anymore, and I haven't for a long time. If you're going to buy a meter and it's a part of your arsenal and you use a voltmeter, you feel very comfortable using a voltmeter or ohm meter, multimeter, I guess. I don't know that I buy just a pure multimeter, if that makes sense. I think I start aiming for the future, and not even the future, like what's out there now. And therefore, my suggestion would be to look into like an insulation tester or a megger. So the two that pop in my head off the cuff are, of course, the Flukes, namely the, I think it's a 1587. I think they have another one, but I don't know if I would go with that one, to be honest. Another one out there is Pico has one. It is the TA467. I think that would be a good move. There's really quite a few out there available. I think Electronic Specialties has them. Autotech has them. Launch, I'm sure, has them. But really, the mainstays, the two that I think, lean towards is the Fluke, which, I mean, come on, that's what they're known for. And then the Pico has been a good meter. It works. And so, yeah, that's really, if you're looking for a volt or a multimeter, more of a pure multimeter, I think I would get one that's also an insulation tester. You're going to end up using it at some point. You're going to start seeing some sort of EV type vehicle or HEV, it's hybrids. Honestly, we're probably going to see vehicles coming in that really are using high voltage to drive components like AC compressors, and not just strictly on hybrids or EV vehicles. You're going to see different voltages. It's going to happen. So it makes sense to have a tester that is kind of getting you ready for that. And honestly, you can hit a couple Thornton classes, and I think we're seeing them in more, I guess, advanced type of electrical classes where insulation meters are being used to test circuits just on our regular 12 volt system. So I think that's the smart move. It's probably more money than you're looking to spend, but it's also setting you up for the future. And I think, as I say maybe too often, and I'm too guilty of being a broken record, I don't know, but I think it's the truth. A lot of this, the shops should be providing or help subsidizing that. Yes, you could go buy a regular pure DMM, but to angle yourself for the future, maybe the shop would help with the purchase of a megger. If a megger is just not at all what you're after, then one of my very favorite meters is either the old Heritage Vantage or the Vantage Pro. You can maybe find some on trucks or ask your dealer. You might be able to find one that somebody's got that was traded in years ago and they can't get rid of it. Honestly, though, I see them up on Facebook Marketplace, diag.net. There's been some for sale, usually very reasonably priced. And now you're getting more than just a meter. You are definitely getting a multimeter. You're also getting a graphing meter and a fairly decent lab scope, especially with the Vantage Pro. The Vantage, as I talked about in another episode on listing off scopes, the screen doesn't lend itself well for real good scope functions, but as a graphing meter, it does perfectly well. Very capable. If you can get a Vantage Pro, great. The Vantage itself is not a big, huge, I guess technically it is a pretty huge step down, but as compared to most regular multimeters, it is not a step down at all. And then I think lastly, off the cuff, I think I would toss in the Curien. That is a pretty darn good multimeter that interfaces with your phone or a tablet through Bluetooth. I mean, what do you say? It's a good price. It works really well. Does graphing meter functions. It's got a couple of built-in type tests. So yeah, that would be also a good alternative than just a straight up multimeter, which I guess I don't want to sound so condescending. It's just, maybe it's just me and I'm missing out. I don't know. I just don't use a straight up meter. If I'm really going to measure the resistance of something, it is with a Vantage Pro, Curien, Pico with my resistance leads, or a megger. That's what I have. And I just have a really hard time recommending somebody invest a fair bit of money in just a straight up voltmeter or multimeter. I don't know. It doesn't sit well with me. So that's what I would recommend. The next question is, what is your process or strategy for electrical issues? That's a really vague question. And I don't mean that to be critical. It's vague. What does that mean? I think step one really is a wiring schematic. Even just locally, I see a lot of people just diving in to an electrical analysis to try to diagnose anything from just even headlights, tail lights, brake lights, to something more complex. They're just diving in with their power probe, with their meter, with their test lights. And if you're going in not knowing what's all involved, you're setting yourself up for, I guess, failure, or at least rabbit hole, just in thinking about the headlights and the taillights and stuff. If there's a module involved, the headlight might not be working, or the taillight or whatever. The light might not be working because the module is in like a self-protect type mode. It's just disabled the circuit, a code is set. One, I would say start with the wiring schematic to get a lay of the land. Then when you see that there's a module involved, now the scan tool's got to be involved. And that's becoming more and more of a thing, right? Almost, I don't want to say almost every, but it really is. A lot of electrical issues, you need to have your scan tool connected. You're going to be monitoring what you can with data. Like, sure, check for codes, but now I want to see what the module sees. And can I command certain things to work and narrow the issue down that way? Meaning, of course, the headlight or a power window, the driver's window doesn't move up and down. It's stuck up. All right, we could start ripping the door apart. Sure. Or we could just assume, and depending on what it is, maybe in all likelihood, checking the wires in the hinge area. But honestly, if you have a wiring schematic and you know that there's driver's door module involved, the body control module involved, now I can go in there with my scan tool, can go to that module, and now can I see the input? Does it know I'm even trying to run the window? And if it doesn't, can I use the scan tool bidirectional controls and command that window open or shut? Because if that works, that sends us in a little bit different direction. Now, granted, both probably could be broken wires in the door, okay, in the hinge area, right? That's an ultra common issue, at least something that I see a lot of, and doesn't seem to matter what car line it is. Mainly the driver's door, and then, of course, the passenger front door. I just feel like that process has to be, let me see what's all involved. Oh, wow, this is a throwback to the old days where there is no module involved. It's the switch does all the work. Now I can access the switch and do all my testing from there and get a really good lay of the land from that. Which direction am I going? It's not getting power, not getting ground. Okay, now maybe I'm ripping into the door hinge area. or going towards the motor. And, chances of wires being broken inside the door itself, pretty low unless we have signs of rodent type intrusions. But, that's a pretty hefty 1-2 punch, especially when applicable. The wiring schematic, of course, and then the scan tool. Using the scan tool to maybe not lead directly to the diagnosis, but narrowing that problem down, splitting the problem in half, sending me in one direction versus another. And then I guess my strategy is always to use the best tool to see what I need to see, if that makes sense, which I don't even know how much I like how I worded that. But if the signal is going to be something pulse width modulated, I'm probably not using a meter. I am going to be scoping that. I want to see that pulse train. If it's something that's going to be carrying a fair bit of current, whatever that is, relative to the circuit, that this is the main feed, it's going to have to be able to carry some current. Again, I might not be using a meter or a scope because it's not going to load the circuit enough. And if the circuit's not working, I don't know that the circuit's being appropriately loaded. So now I'm using something that's going to pull some current to verify that feed, that ground. I'm going to kind of stress them a little bit. And I'm basing that off, I suppose, a little bit of experience. A lot of it too is just, what is it fused for? If this power window is fused for 10 amps, then I'm probably going to use something that's going to draw about half that, something like close to half that. It could be more, of course, not more than the 10 amps, but more than 5. I'm probably not looking for, working really hard to get something that pulls 9. Certainly could, but that's not my intent. And so 5 amps, I'm probably using like a headlight. And if the headlight glows brightly and I could use my meter with it, hook my meter, back probing my pigtail, or have some connectors off of my pigtail from my light socket, or that I can quickly access with my meter, that now I can see not only that the light glows brightly, but it's also maintaining system voltage, 12 volts, whatever. That's my approach. I don't know. I'm not really sure how much further to go into that. Another, I guess, just kind of popped in my head, depending on the circuit. I like going to relays, if I can, to best case scenarios to back probe. Otherwise, I want to either use kind of those Lyle adapters that you lift the relay out, set in, and test from there, or the U-Activate. I like using the U-Activate. The reason I like relays typically is definitely they're on the control side. And so now I can monitor what the control side of the relay itself, as well as the output. It's just kind of a centralized area and good access for if I want to measure current, do any kind of current test, current ramping, if you will, to see what's being drawn. I guess I've always kind of liked that. It seems to me that it stems from some bugged cars in college for my third year involving a cooling fan. And I really liked being able to go to that relay and there, 4 wires, bang, bang, bang. And I kind of knew, well, the relay is not even being commanded on. And then I got a direction where, the relay is sending the voltage to the component. Okay, now I got to kind of get to the component. And as I got a little more experience, realized, hey, I can take my current probe here, clamp it, hit that circuit a few times and go, well, it's not drawing any current, so I still got to get to that component. Or, man, this thing's drawing pretty good current, an appropriate amount. Oftentimes, again, I base that off amperage of what the circuit's being fused for, and kind of in that half range, roughly. Unless we're talking about electric motors, where I'm kind of looking for a stall current, which I've talked about, or in-rush current that often exceeds the rating of the fuse, but only for, milliseconds, microseconds, very short burst, very quick. Then I kind of have an idea like, okay, it's getting current. It's not doing its job. It's most likely going to be this component. And then, we're taking it apart to most likely replace it. And then you kind of finish the diagnosis there, but you know a lot going in. Yeah, I think that's really my strategy. I don't know what else I would add to that. I think that's the gist of it. NAPA Autotech training sessions are being conducted day and night in a town near you. This training caters to every level within your organization, be it a mechanical assistant, a mechanical specialist, a technology specialist, or a driver safety calibration specialist. Imagine a one-stop shop training partner in NAPA Autotech that will lead your team to a path to greatness. Autotech's entry-level Build-A-Tech classes convert the untapped potential of your new hires into money-making mechanical specialists. Autotech's higher-level tech update classes introduce specialists to the world of ever-changing technologies, which prevents your shop from getting technologically stagnant. Remember, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. And, turning to the front of the store, the Autotech Service Advisor class is an awesome way to hone your client advocate skill set, ultimately benefiting the customer through an improved vehicle repair experience. But it doesn't stop there. Imagine an electric vehicle class that takes your specialist well past the mundane, yet necessary safety topics. Well, it's here. Autotech's EV Ready training is a week-long curriculum that takes participants through a hands-on experience involving hybrids and electric vehicles. The session kicks off with the use of PPE and proper tooling while touching on required OSHA regulations. Then, the students dive into the lab vehicles to gain knowledge of the common high-voltage components on EV and hybrid vehicles and their function. Attendees will be taken on a path exposing them to different electric vehicle manufacturers to compare component form and location. Additionally, information about Level 1 and Level 2 charging systems will be included, along with a quick look at DC to DC charging. The operation and maintenance of subsystems are explored, including the different modes of Tesla operations, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Commit to taking your business to the next level with NAPA Autotech training. The next question. Who is my 17th favorite trainer? Richard Velko. Yeah, and that's up. I mean, he's moving up. Next question. I have read about something called the Flat Radar Test Drive. What is that? Well, I'm not sure where you've read it. If you read it on IATN in the archives, then I think my sarcastic answer is you should have kept reading and I would have told you. But if you see it mentioned in groups, other forums, the idea, I think, and I could be miscrediting this. I don't think so, but I guess I'm torn. I think it is either Jim Wilson, who works for Standard Motor Products, but it could have been Lance Mossman. I'm kind of torn on which one. Lance used to be a brilliant GM dealer tech as well. Him and Jim both just next level. One of the two. I want to say Jim, but I could be full of it. It could have been Lance. The idea was very quickly for issues like lack of power that you would set your scan tool to monitor. We would be talking, at least in their cases, mainly General Motors vehicles, which had a load PID. And the load PID, if I recall, is absolute load. It is very, very closely related to VE or volumetric efficiency. So you would pull up a few PIDs, probably RPM, although I don't know that you really had to, but you probably would. Oxygen sensor, well, not probably, this is pre-AFR days, air fuel ratio sensor days. Oxygen sensor, fuel trims. Depending on your GMs, it could have been integrator block learn, but really fuel trims, short-term, long-term fuel trims, mass airflow or MAP or both. Yeah, off the cuff, those are the heavy hitters. And you would, I suppose like throttle position sensor. And you would go and find a space where you could do a series of accelerations, and they are going to be very hard accelerations. Wide open throttle, near wide open throttle, and you're going to try to get a couple of 1-2 shifts. And you really wanted to watch all those PIDs. Probably not while you're driving it. You would make a couple of recordings. So even back then, way back then, Tech 2 did wonderful recordings. Take it back, upload it, review it. We could do the same thing with all of our scan tools now. Record it, go back for review. You really wanted to watch, if you're experiencing a lack of power, what was the oxygen sensor doing? Did it tank low? Did it tank, rail high? If it went low, you knew it was going lean. Then you could probably look at you could see what the load PID was. And over time, you would build up a bit of a database on an expected good load. And it might be, 85%, 90% was considered normal. If you had a mass airflow sensor PID giving you grams per second, you could kind of swag that around, this didn't really care so much about idle, but just to add a little bit, idle mass airflows would sit the grams per second kind of around what the liters were of the vehicle. So if the engine was a 3.8 liter at idle, you're probably seeing around 3.8, 4 grams a second, roughly. Could be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. You would get a feel for it, because also we have to consider altitude and all that. So got to be careful when we're throwing these numbers out. And so I guess I almost need to preface it like ASE that this stuff is for sea level. So then we're talking about this wide open throttle pull. I think kind of a rule of thumb was grams per second would be roughly 40 times whatever the liters were. So, for math, the purposes of math, if this is a 5-liter engine, wide open throttle, you'd really want to see 200 grams per second, right? And that would ballpark you, and stuff when it was bad, it was usually really bad. It wasn't close. You weren't sitting there going like, oh, geez, 199? This has got a breathing problem? Depending on where you live and what you normally saw, maybe. But generally, I think, in my neck of the woods, which was very close to sea level, I wasn't thinking about a breathing issue. So if I had an oxygen sensor that just tanked lean, went very low voltage, but my load PID looked pretty decent, my mass airflow would then, of course, have to be pretty good if my load PID was good. But if I was glancing at it, it's right there. It's reading about what I would expect, close to that 1-2 shift. I'm not thinking about breathing issues. I'm thinking about fuel delivery. And that was really the essence of the flat rater test drive, or the flat rate test drive. If we reverse it, it was railed high. The oxygen sensor is railed rich, and it's not getting out of its own way. What does that load PID look like? Is it low? Okay, I have some sort of a restriction. And then I'm looking at, what did my map sensor do? How did that behave? Interestingly enough, like, you could watch your map sensor, and as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about another PID they would add is the baro PID, the barometric pressure PID. And if you had like a restriction before the mass airflow sensor, so like a heavily restricted air filter, or I think what would happen was common was rags, somebody accidentally changing the air filter, cleaning stuff up, trying to do a good job. They accidentally left a rag in the air filter box, and it would happen before the mass airflow sensor. So, again, a lot of this was related to GM. It did work on everything. You might not be so lucky as to have grams per second on the scan tool, or a load PID that was really kind of related to the absolute load. You had to be really careful about that, or you'd have choices of a load PID and you'd have to choose the right one. Of course, you could go into generic data, and that was depending on where you lived. A lot of times that was not a knee-jerk move to go to the generic data, but a lot of times that's where it was at. The information you needed to pull this off. But you would see this baro PID under load start dropping, meaning, and you could look at the map sensor and verify this, right? Under hard acceleration, pedal to the floor, getting close to that 1-2 shift, you're expecting your manifold pressure to be pretty close to atmospheric. So you'd have a map sensor voltage reading, or maybe vacuum reading, that would be very close to, voltage wise, very close to 4.5 volts, something like that. Vacuum would be, depending on how it's depicting it, right? You got to be careful. It could have been 0. It could have been even 15, right? We got to be careful depending on vehicle. And you would see it start dropping because you had a new throttle, and it wasn't the throttle plate anymore. It was whatever was restricting airflow up to, or up before, the mass airflow sensor. So that was pretty interesting. That would affect things. And of course, your catalytic converter restriction, or exhaust path restriction. So very quickly, you could get kind of a direction, right? Kind of like a couple episodes ago, I was talking about fuel trims. They can give you a direction. Flat rater test drive, put the car, or really the engine, stressed it in certain ways that while watching certain PIDs that I've rattled off, could give you a direction. Just like with the electrical stuff, the wiring schematic, the scan tool, testing at a centralized area if possible. It's giving you direction. So I guess I should have opened to this episode with some lyric from One Direction. I just don't know any of their songs. Sorry. I hope that explains what the flat rate test drive was. All right. The next question, a little not automotive related. What game are you playing right now? I am playing Elden Ring. I'm looking kind of forward to maybe playing this new Assassin's Creed Shadows. A little worried about it. Been kind of waiting for somebody to do a really good kind of ninja game. You know, after the Ghosts of Tsushima, I thought that would lend itself really well to a almost pure ninja type game. I don't know if this will be it or not. So I'm a little scared about it. And I see there is going to be a remaster of Days Gone, which is a terrific game involving freakers or zombies in a zombie apocalypse. Terrific game. The remaster, I don't know. I don't know if the graphics are going to be that much better. I'm sure they're not going to add too much content to the game itself, and the graphics aren't that bad, right? It's not like 8-bit or nothing. Last question I think will be, it's a lot of really good ones. The shop I'm working at is letting me do more and more drivability, but we only have one scan tool and I want to buy one for myself. What do you recommend? Okay. One, I think the shop should buy a scan tool. I just do. If we're talking about just drivability, and that's how I'm going to take this, that this is going to be your focus and you're trying to keep costs down. My knee jerk for drivability is HP tuners. No, not so you can tune the car. The scanner is really good. I think there's multiple episodes where I've mentioned HP tuners. I think it made my list, or at least honorable mention of favorite scan tools. The Sean's Automotive Diagnostic podcast, him and I have talked about it. You know what? For the cost, it's going to be a generic scan tool, but the ability to get that data and the refresh rate and how fast it samples, if you will, and some of the things you can do with charts and graphs make it quite powerful. I shouldn't say, it doesn't seem to be, compared to other choices, as cost prohibitive. After that, I'm not sure how to approach it, in that we're talking about tech spending their own money. You want to get something decent for your money. So I have a bunch of ideas. Like, one is like the Top Scan from Topdon. Xtool has a offering as well. The Xtool AnyScan. They are basically, you're buying a dongle. It's interfacing with your phone or a tablet. And then after that, you know, can you pick up a used like Snap-on Solus Edge or even a Solus Pro? But really, I mean, you kind of want an Edge, I think. Solus Ultra, maybe not a Solus Pro. So more like a Solus Ultra, Solus Edge if you can. Can you pick up one of those guys for not a terrible amount of money? That will, of course, do generic data. Snap-on Graph's pretty good, although I don't know if it does graph quite as good as HP tuners, but the Solus would have more enhanced data, of course. It would be more of a full function scan tool, so that might be worth thinking about. And from there, it just starts, how much money do you want to spend? Like, what's your budget? Then we're starting to get into where we can get into more of the professional level Autels, Topdons, launches type stuff. But yeah, I guess I'm thinking, you specifically said drivability in the question. Therefore, you're thinking along those lines, and for the money, and forget money aside, actually money aside, the ability, the capability of the HP tuners is impressive. And then on top of it, the cost is not so brutal, especially to a technician's pocketbook. But, you know, scan tools really should be a shop investment. My advice would be the HP tuners. So yeah, I hope you guys got some stuff out of that. Hopefully, if you didn't, send emails with such questions that those would be questions that would be on your mind. I do read everything. If I don't respond, I'm probably thinking about making it an episode. So yeah, don't think I'm not reading anything. Please, if you have more ideas, send them my way. If there's a certain technical type of topics you want more time spent on, please shoot me an email at mattfanslowpodcast@gmail.com. Yeah, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training. Thanks once again to the Aftermarket Radio Network. You know, it's going to be a customary shout out to Craig and his podcast. I feel obligated. Could be the threatening letters, but if you get a chance, check out Sean's brother's podcast, Craig. I think it's called Speak Up. Should have been called Speak Easy, but it's not. They didn't let me in on the brainstorming session. Can't imagine why. But yeah, that is how I'll end it. So thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.
You've been listening to Matt Fanslow, diagnosing the aftermarket A to Z on the Aftermarket Radio Network. Follow Matt on your favorite listening app. He's very interested in what you have to say. Let him know what you'd like him to cover and come on the show. Matt is all for advancing the aftermarket. Find Matt Fanslow on social media and connect or on aftermarketradionetwork.com.